So I'd like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Heather Hill, and she will be talking about Beluga contact behavior. She is a comparative psychologist and a full professor in psychology at St. Mary's University in Texas A&M. Nah, I'm sorry, St. Mary's University in Texas. I had Texas A&M on the brain there. Nicole and I will be monitoring the chat. And as I mentioned a bit earlier, please remember to submit your questions to the chat, and remember that we are recording. So keep those videos and microphones off if you don't want to be seen during the program. So with that, Heather, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and you should be able to take this over.
Okay, let me see if I can find the right screen to put up for you guys. Let's see. Oop, there we are. And then let's make sure there we are. All right. Hopefully everybody is able to see that. I am super excited to be sharing the research that we've been working on for quite a while now with everybody joining me. And I have to give a special shout out to my nieces who are joining us. So thanks for coming, Miss Peyton and Perry. Glad to have you guys be a part of all this, as well as our friends at SeaWorld and a number of other students and other things. So thank you for joining us today. I'm really glad to be here. It is always a pleasure to work with Dolphin Communication Project and Kathleen and Cal and Nicole. So super excited to be sharing what we've done today. So kind of what I've decided to do, and please, if you have questions, let's talk about them as we go through, because that's the easiest way to begin to think about all of this. I am going to hide this panel so that I can actually see what I'm supposed to be saying on the slides. This is when you really need like multiple screens. So we're going to talk about contact, and today we're going to talk about two types of contact primarily, but we'll talk a little bit about that third contact. So when we think about contact, we can kind of break it down into social forms of contact, object forms of contact, and then the contact that we do for ourselves, oftentimes in a self-soothing kind of experience. So I wanted to share a few pictures up here as examples of the different kinds of contact that we're going to look at today. So up there in the upper left of your screen, you see the elephants that are holding on to a calf who had fallen into or was about to fall into that water. And you see that they're all very close, and there's many aspects of contact with that. On the other right-hand side of the screen, you see a calf that is just up underneath mom as a killer whale calf. And although they are technically not contacting in this picture, the way that they're positioned would actually create quite a bit of contact. And then, of course, we have some object contact examples with Bella down there on the bottom left-hand side, one of the belugas that we've had the privilege to watch over the years with one of her favorite toys. Actually, it was one of her preferred toys. And Peter over there on the right-hand side, he was our cat, and he really loved that bat. And so he often found it when we had it out for Halloween and snuggled up against it. And then there in the middle picture, you see one of the rhesus monkey infants that was representing, was a subject of Harry Harlow's work, where he really helped us to begin to understand the critical nature of contact. So one of the really key pieces about contact is that it creates a, not a soothing, but we also know it creates a cascade of physiological changes in individuals. And so as social species, contact is super, super important. We know that social species that don't have the right kind of contact, they don't develop properly. And many times when contact is withheld, it actually leads to shortened lives because it increases the stress levels that the individuals are experiencing. So contact is an area that needs so much more research, and I'm glad that we're able to begin to explore a little bit of it as we go through today. So let's see here. So here are a few more examples of the different types of social contact. We are going to concentrate primarily on mother-calf contact today and some other forms of affiliative contact. But we also know that contact occurs in sociosexual situations, in copulatory experiences, obviously, and in aggressive interactions that have escalated to the point at which contact is required. Again, in these images, I kind of wanted to point out, you'll see that, again, Harry Harlow's, let's see if my pointer will work here, his information on contact comfort, which is the key thing of when we were first learning about the importance of mothers and their offspring in particular in this situation. The question was, is the bond that's built between mothers and their babies or mothers and their infants due to the nutrition that's provided, or was it due to something else? And although Harry Harlow's work is very controversial, it was extremely important in helping us understand the impact of contact and the importance of it has on comforting individuals. And so here again is a rhesus monkey infant that's been separated from his mother and was given the choice between a wire monkey that provided milk and nutrition and a contact comfort monkey that had a soft terry cloth covering. And you can see that when given the choice in fearful situations or any situation, he preferred that contact comfort. And one of the things that we've learned with humans, particularly with premature babies, is that kangaroo care is particularly helpful in developing the systems that maybe aren't quite mature yet if they're born too early. And so by having that skin-to-skin contact for human infants, it really makes a difference in development and helping them reach that mature state a little bit faster if they came out a little early. When it comes to looking at the different forms of contact between mothers and their offspring with marine mammals such as killer whales or bottlenose dolphins, there are all sorts of different ways. And DCP has spent a lot of time, this is one of my favorite pictures of one of the first sets of dolphins that I observed way back in 1997. This is Kelly and her offspring, and she's showing some lovely pec fin contact there for that neonate with her newborn calf there. And we also have opportunities where we allo-groom. So you see the chimpanzees allo-grooming, they're usually picking ticks off. It's part of a development of bonds, maintenance of bonds, as well as, taking care of removal of parasites and things that could cause illness. And so when we start thinking about social contact, it can come in a lot of different forms. And we really recognize that affiliative contact, that parental offspring contact is particularly important in a lot of ways. There's lots of really neat research out there that shows us without contact, we just really don't develop if you're a social species the way that we would like to. All right, so I'm going to move forward and keep talking about some belugas now, if there aren't any questions yet. So we've been looking at belugas since 2007 at SeaWorld San Antonio, which has a really great breeding program, one of the best in the world. And it's been such a privilege to be a part of that program and to have the doors opened up to be able to come in and begin to understand what we know about belugas. And so before we can start talking about what we've learned about belugas from that experience, I really wanted to kind of put it in the context of the bigger picture. So we see all that purple area, and these are all the areas that belugas can be found. In fact, there's approximately 22 separate stocks of belugas that are found across the world. It's what we call circumpolar. So they go all the way around the world in the northern hemisphere. So they're only found in the Arctic and subarctic waters. So they really prefer these cold waters with lots of icebergs and that become frozen during winter months. And so these species, this particular set of species, this marine mammal, it's a whale, will find its way around a lot of different areas. So here we are in our North America continent, and you can see that they are covering a lot of areas above, primarily in the Canadian region. And then they'll hop on down into Alaska and a few other areas. And in fact, Alaska has one of the most critically endangered populations at the Cook Inlet population that we have a really great story for SeaWorld San Antonio, which I'll share in a little while. So a bit about belugas besides where they like to live. So they are very large white marine mammals that are toothed whales, and they are benthic feeders. They also eat normal fish, but they do like to kind of dig around in the sediment and look for, you know, little tiny things that are built around. Generally, when we think about how long do they live, this has been kind of a work in progress as we've learned more and more about belugas. They have been studied for quite a while, since really like the 50s and 60s out in their natural habitat. But it's taken a while for us to begin to really understand what we've learned about them today. And so what we have discovered is that if you go look at the literature that's currently out there, and they've used a lot of different dating techniques, everything from teeth from deceased whales to different kinds of monitoring programs that have allowed them to observe the animals in different ways, we can see that they range somewhere between 5 and 33 years on average in terms of estimated lifespan. And so we are at the point where out in the wild, the males are projected to live a little longer than the females are. And but why this is, we don't know. This is still something that we're working towards in terms of genetics and understanding the populations that we have in the various stocks of belugas around the world. In managed care, we have a number of belugas that were brought in from their natural habitat when they were very young, and they are well over 40 at this particular point. So we have quite a few animals in our care that are doing quite well and have certainly met the estimated lifespan on average. If we are into the US metrics system of weights and you know, different lengths and stuff, they run between 13 and 20 feet, which translates to about 4 to 6 meters for our metric system. And that is pretty consistent within the wild. Males are sexually dimorphic and females are sexually dimorphic, which means the males are a little bit bigger than the females. So the males tend to be on the heavier side, upwards to 3,300 pounds or 1,500 kilograms approximately. And the females tend to be a little bit smaller, but there are some females that can get up there along with the males in general. And we're going to see kind of some images of what they look like in one of their natural habitat areas. So approximately 3 to 5 calves in a lifetime is what we've estimated, because they have a dependence period anywhere from 2 to 3 years. They usually are weaned somewhere between 2 and 3 years of age, and then they just kind of hang out with their moms for a little while, and then they start to create a more a more adult-like experience. And so this is one of the questions that we've actually been trying to figure out with these animals in their natural habitat. So when you look at them and where they live, they are often found in very large congregations, but they also can be found in smaller congregations. So you see that this range between 10 to hundreds and in some cases thousands of belugas may be found in one geographic area. So here's an image that kind of shows you a handful of them, but we're going to see some more images where you're going to see a lot more of them in different areas. What we know so far about their life history is that many of the beluga stocks migrate from one area to another area, depending on the season. So when it's winter, they go to certain areas, and then when it's summer, they go to different areas. And in the summertime months, they tend to go to slightly warmer waters where they will congregate in huge herds. And this is where you see a lot of birds happening. You see a lot of calves present. You see a lot of mixing of adult males and adult females. We would presume that there's also a lot of copulation that's going on in this period of time, but our breeding season for belugas generally starts in February, and it typically ends somewhere in June. And they have about a 14-month gestation period, so that translates quite nicely if there is breeding taking place on the way to the breeding grounds. And then you would see the calves showing up somewhere between May and June, or July and August. And although there is a little bit of difference in terms of when calves occur. I mean, certainly there have been calves that have been born as late as September and October, but the majority of them, no matter what the stock is, the majority of them are being born somewhere in the summertime months, which correlates with kind of warmer waters and the different areas that they're going to. So we're really trying to understand through a lot of genetics and today more drone footage and being able to follow what's going going on with those belugas in their natural habitat, to try to understand their social grouping. Right now, it seems like belugas are a lot like bottlenose dolphins that show fission fusion societies, where you see these large congregations that kind of come and go and intermix. And then you have individuals like the males who are going to be more likely to be found on their own, adult males, and they kind of cruise around and move different areas. But some of the stocks are really starting to show that they might actually be mixing more than we anticipated. And so that's part of what we're trying to understand through the work that's being done out in the natural habitat, is really how do these animals socialize? It does seem that beluga mothers and their offspring tend to stay together in larger groups, and those offspring that are weaned or are juvenile subadult animals may stay with those mother offspring groups that are mixed, or they may go out on their own. And that's kind of one of the questions that we really are still struggling to try to answer in the natural habitat. We know with bottlenose dolphins that they have been able to see a juvenile subadult group that kind of goes around while they are reaching that maturity. And I think we have a question. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Trying to remember the buttons to push. When you were, the question pertains to, you were talking about the fission fusion group with dolphins, bottlenose dolphins, for example, and then you're talking about belugas may have something similar to that, and that the juveniles might stay with mom, or you might have males going off. Would that be similar to, for example, in sperm whales, or maybe in some of the other bottlenose dolphins, where you might have males that form bachelor herds or bachelor groups for a bit of time and go off and then, you know, come back at certain times?
So that's a really great question. And our guess is that that might be what's happening, but we are not totally sure. And part of our evidence from that is coming from finding groups of adult males away from and on their own in areas where there aren't other types of animals around. So that's our best guess right now. And I would suspect that that is true for some stocks, but it does not seem to be true for all stocks. So for example, Cook Inlet doesn't do that. They tend to have that mix of males and females of all ages in the areas together. And trying to think of some of the other areas that we would also see those tendencies in. So I think there's some flexibility, and I think it depends on the habitat they're in.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Thank
great
you.
question. Okay, keep them coming. So let's take a look at what we can see. So one of the surprising things that really occurred to me, because I spent the first 10 years of my life really studying bottlenose dolphins, and then moved into belugas and have been studying belugas and bottlenose dolphins and killer whales and a few other animals for the last decade now, is the independence that the calves showed at a very early age in terms of being a neonate. So here is some of the work that's being done now within, let's see if it actually posts up here. Let me try this one here. There we are. Within different areas. So this is actually an underwater camera area from the Churchill Bay area. They take out Zodiac and they have an underwater camera. And so in this image, part of the thing that really struck me, which is why we're here talking about contact, because I haven't actually talked a whole lot about contact yet, was after watching belugas for a really long time and watching dolphins for a really long time, I was struck by the differences in how belugas interacted with one another that I was observing at SeaWorld San Antonio primarily, and then what I had observed with all sorts of bottlenose dolphins groups. And so one of my questions became, as I was interacting with lots of managed care individuals that had belugas, was, hey, how often do belugas actually touch? And a lot of times they would stop and think, well, they're always touching. And then they would go, well, maybe not. And so as we start seeing this underwater footage from belugas in their natural habitat, I am astounded, because yes, these animals are in very close proximity to one another. You see a lot of them in small areas that they could be stretched out and looking all over the place, and yet you really don't see a lot of contact. So there's a little bit there. But let's watch this for a little bit so we can see some of the highlights that come from the underwater footage that's there. So here we see a mom calf pair that just came into view. So as we were trying to look, when they give you that nice presentation where they show that ventral side to the camera, you can begin to see we have mothers and calves, or we have adult males, or we have juveniles, because the coloration is different. So you can see the calf over here is a darker gray compared to mom, who is a much whiter color. And I'm assuming this is the mother, because typically the calves are spending 50 to 60% of their time. And as a neonate or a yearling, as this calf appears to be, they're spending upwards to 80% of their time with their mothers. They do engage in some allomaternal care, but it's very limited. And as you can see, these animals are extremely curious as they're trying to bite and open a mouth at the camera. So we have another question.
Yes, specifically with that calf that we were observing, it seemed to be more on the dorsal side of the peduncle of the presumed mother. And in dolphins, you see them in the infant position, which is below the peduncle. Has that been looked at, or do you have any thoughts on that particular positioning?
Actually, that's a really great question. So we have looked at these sorts of things, and we do know that there are developmental milestones. And this is one of the things that's been really great about looking at dolphins and belugas and killer whales, is that we see there's a change. So what makes me think this calf might be a yearling is that they tend to spend more of their time on the top side of mom, on that peduncle region, before in that first year of life, until they go underneath to nurse or need some protection. And then somewhere between that 9 months to 12-month period, they begin to slip down into that infant position more often. And so that echelon position that you see where the calf was hanging out a little bit, it tends to be one that they do very early on. And then as they get older, they don't do it quite as often with their mothers, but they might do it with each other. And that's been one of the things that we've been looking at. One of the other really interesting things that reminds me of this is that belugas are really weird. So this is entitled quirky for a reason. Beluga calves really like to lay on top of their moms. So they will just kind of hang out on top of mom. So you see them very close right there. But that calf will actually just lay on mom and be carried by mom on all parts of her body. And this is true across all the stocks that we've observed beluga calves in their natural habitat. And it also happens with beluga calves in managed care. And it is absolutely hysterical to watch this, because when you look at a bottlenose dolphin calf, they really don't like to be pushed or laid on top of their moms. In fact, the moms tend to use it, the mothers use it as a disciplinary technique. But for the beluga calves, completely different experience. So we can see that there are a few differences in terms of the different species that we've been looking at. And most of the contact, if you've been watching, has mainly been the calf contacting the mom. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk a little bit about. So I hope you guys have had some fun watching belugas in their natural habitat. And although they can be very close together with one another, they're often not touching or choosing to touch intentionally. So how do you decide that? I don't know. There are certain things that allow us to be able to say we think that animal chose to swim near that other animal and rub its flukes over it or rub the body over it or whatever it may be. So here are some really interesting images that have been captured both underwater and above water in different areas of our beluga stocks that we pay attention to and we're focusing a lot on. And it's really curious because when you, again, talk to individuals who are doing the research in the natural habitat, you ask them, hey, how often do belugas touch one another? And they're like, they touch all the time. And then you say, really, do they touch all the time? And then they start saying, well, I don't know. Let's look at it. So here down in this bottom image, Cunningham Inlet is an area where they congregate in very shallow waters. And they have many intermixed sexes in this area during the summer months. And if you happen to look at where the pointer is, you see a mom calf pair here, another mom calf pair here, another mom calf pair, another mom calf pair. So this group is primarily mothers and calves, but they are known to have sort of escorts, much like gray whales and humpback whales, where you have adult males kind of hanging out in the same area with these adult females and their offspring, and then juveniles that are also present. So this is an area that we really hope that we can begin to explore more and look at it a little bit more systematically in terms of how often is contact actually occurring, and if it is occurring, how does it occur? What is being used to touch? Okay, so let's go talk a little bit about what we found over the years here. Primarily at SeaWorld San Antonio is where we began the study, and then we've had some multiple opportunities now to begin to look at it at other facilities. And so I'm mainly going to talk today about SeaWorld San Antonio and Marineland of Canada, because that's where we've done the bulk of this research. But certainly between Shedd Aquarium and Georgia Aquarium and the other SeaWorld parks, we've had some other opportunities to begin to kind of make sure that what we're seeing is valid and what we're seeing is happening across multiple sets of animals, multiple populations, multiple settings, all that sort of stuff. So what we have discovered using, and this really was just 5 mother-calf pairs, 4 of whom were bonded, and the 5th mother-calf pair was not bonded. And that calf was hand-reared, even though mom was always present. And so when we look at all of our data, whether we're looking at SeaWorld San Antonio animals or we're looking at Marineland of Canada animals, calves are initiating 98% of the contact with their mothers. Mothers will initiate some contact with their calves, but the calves are doing the majority of it. In bottlenose dolphins, this is not quite so lopsided. It seems to be a little bit more even. And although calves are still initiating the majority of the contact within bottlenose dolphin mother-calf pairs, the mothers are also initiating quite a bit. But in belugas, that doesn't seem to be the case. We know that when we have interactions between beluga mother-calf pairs, about 30% of those interactions have contact from what we've estimated. And as the question was asked about infant position, so here's kind of almost infant position. It's not quite where we want to be, but close enough. And then we have an echelon position and then kind of that side-by-side swim position. When we start thinking about how much contact is occurring within each of these swim positions, our estimate at this point, infant is 75% being, I think, is an under representation. They're not in contact 100% of the time, but they're in contact a lot of time. But it's really tough to try to measure that contact, because your job is to make sure that there is no space between this animal and this animal. And that's sometimes very difficult to perceive through a glass wall and from above water. But when you get that underwater footage, it really makes a huge difference, which is one of the advantages that Dolphin Communication Project has with the research that they've been doing for years with that. Echelon position, 15% approximately is how much time they're in contact. So they swim very close to them in proximity, but they aren't always laying on them or touching them constantly. And then when they're in more of a side-by-side pair swim, about 6% of the time contact was taking place. And then when we start thinking about affiliative interactions where they have those nose-to-nose or head-to-head kind of experiences, about 9% of their affiliative types of interactions are going to be involving contact. Now, when we look at juvenile contact, it looks very different. So when we think about what body parts are being used for calves and their mothers, a lot of it is this head to body and sometimes body to body stuff. But in very specific areas. They will do some head-to-head contact, and the calves definitely will rub all over mom's head. But when it comes to calf, juvenile kinds of contact, they engage in a lot of different sorts of contact. But what's interesting to us, and this could be complete coincidence and something that we need to verify with the Marineland data, which we should be doing fairly soon, is that the affiliative contact between mothers and their calves is approximately the same amount of affiliative contact between calves and other calves, or juveniles and other juveniles. And I think this is an important piece of all of this, because it really helps us to understand how they build bonds. So while it's unclear if adult males are forming long-term bonds with other adult males, like we might see in bottlenose dolphins and alliances that they can create and bonds that they create, it is clear that contact does seem to play a role in the development of the mother-calf bond, and it is important in these bonds that they're forming with each other, given who's around and who's available. So juvenile contact involves a lot of different body positions. Here we see an example of a sociosexual contact experience, and these juveniles in here were approximately between 1 and 3 years of age for this image that was taken here. So you see a lot of different kinds of interactions. This behavior here, where we see a pelvic thrust, would not occur with the mothers and their calves. The calves may thrust onto their mothers, but the mothers would never reciprocate that. So we see some very specific kinds of behaviors that are occurring with juveniles that don't occur with their mothers, and that don't occur between adult females. So I'm not going to talk a whole lot about adult females, because adult females don't contact each other very often, and the observations that we've seen, but we're going to get to that in just a moment. One of the things that's been really interesting is that when we measured the length of a social interaction, we found that when contact was present, particularly affiliative forms of contact, the interactions lasted longer. Now, I'm saying it in that direction, but it could be that the longer that the social interaction occurred, the more contact could have happened. So when we start thinking about which is coming first, that's a tough one to say. All right, Miss Kathleen, what you got?
Could you, I know you've talked about some of the positions and the affiliative nature, but when you've been talking about contact, could you give some examples of the contact, just for reference, pec fin contact, or, fluke or melon or head? I know you've talked a little bit about the mom calf, but are they seeing the same types? Like, obviously in dolphins, we see a lot of pec fin to body contact. I'm not sure you see that much in the belugas, but other types of contact for reference.
Right. So when we start looking at body parts and things that are being used within the contact, and we'll get there more specifically. Obviously, if we're in a swim position with a calf and a mother, most of the contact is happening between the melon and the under part of the body. If they're in this infant position, sometimes it's the back of the calf to the under part of the mother. When they're in this echelon position, usually it's going to be the belly of the calf on the dorsal ridge or the peduncle area of the mother. And when it's that side-to-side contact, it's usually happening, the side-to-side contact actually usually involves them rubbing across their mothers on the top of them. So they swim across. So you mentioned pectoral fin contact, which of course is one of your favorite topics. And when we think about pectoral fin contact, it happens, but it doesn't happen nearly in the same degree that it happens in bottlenose dolphins. So okay. I think that pectoral fin contact is part of their contact, but it is not a way that they manage their relationships that we have observed between mothers and their calves, and between calves and calves, and between adults that we have seen contact occur. So we'll talk a little bit more about positions of what kinds of contact are taking place as we look through these sorts of things. But a lot of the juvenile contact is happening as rubs with full bodies or part of the bodies. Sometimes it's a lot of rubbing across a head. Some of the contact that we see is this game that we call the mouth game, which is a tug of war with mouths that emerges very early in beluga calves that we don't really see in other animals. Killer whales have been captured to do something that looks more like this, but they don't do this particular behavior. And it seems to be pretty selective to the belugas, and they do it what I think is a developmental milestone. And I actually think that it is a precursor and involves many of their sociosexual behaviors that will eventually become their sexual behaviors as males.
And then just one wrap up to that question. You've been talking mostly about affiliative contact. Do you also document aggressive or agonistic contact?
We do, and thankfully we don't see it very often. But we do have research on Rake Marks that they do engage, which is taking their teeth and scratching it across the surface of the body. And so we have actually just worked on a paper with that in terms of our wild population. And so Rake Marks, while they happen on the majority of the bodies, they don't cover much of the body, unlike bottlenose dolphins. So they don't use their teeth as much. Belugas are very much into displays as opposed to as opposed to aggressive mouthing interactions. They do it though. Let me jump to a couple of pictures if we'll hold a question real fast. Okay. So here's an example of that mouth-to-mouth game with juveniles. And so this is an example of a social play that is very gentle and sometimes leaves marks and sometimes don't. But the majority of that kind of behavior is done with animals who don't have their teeth yet. Have we seen it in adults? We've seen it with adults and an adult and a calf, or an adult and a juvenile, or an adult and a subadult. And what they were doing where they were coming up like that looks a lot like what we see in the wild image here that you see from some Russian belugas. So this is a pretty important behavior. So we know that contact is critical with some of this stuff, but we're still trying to understand what does it mean and how is it used. So that aggressive contact that Kathleen just asked about. So again, you see a series of pictures here. And while this behavior looks aggressive, and it looks like this subadult is mouthing this juvenile, and he is, it's a very gentle. And when this mouth was removed, it did not leave any marks like a rake mark. So if you're doing an agonistic contact, the most agonistic physical contact we tend to see would be a rake, which would take this mouth and rake along the side of the body. Every once in a while, you might see an animal chase another animal and attempt to ram it, but that happens more with bottlenose dolphins than it does with belugas, to be honest. We do see chases, we do see some aggressive interactions, but they typically involve open mouth displays, vocalizations, and some chases. And that is about the extent of aggression. One of the other key things that we really are interested in terms of different types of contact that maybe not necessarily be affiliative, but isn't agonistic, is the sociosexual contact that takes place between these belugas. Again, bottlenose dolphins are particularly notorious at this as well. Belugas seem to be very display oriented. So these are two male-male dyads, and this is one of the things that really became critical to us to see. So you can see that they are spaced apart. There isn't much contact, but they do contact one another when they engage in this pelvic thrust. So you see this male here is in an S posture getting ready to thrust upon this animal, and I didn't get that picture when I was watching this series of animals. But you can see that they do, and in our care, when you have adult males available, their preferred partner, if they're going to swim, and this is what's really crazy about belugas, males will prefer to swim with other males if they're not swimming by themselves. Females really don't seem to group up together in most cases, even if they have calves. They tend to kind of follow their own paths and they maintain their own spacing with their calves. And every once in a while, you see a group of mothers and calves together in belugas. And as you saw in the images from Cunningham Inlet, there are obviously large groups and congregations of mothers and calves together, but it's not like the same as it is with bottlenose dolphins, where they will often be very tightly knit to one another and hanging out and interacting with each other. This is another series of pictures that we can see here that was taken from an airplane in Cook Inlet, in an area in Cook Inlet. And they, the images, the authors of this particular paper where these images came from, considered it to be breeding potentially, but they also acknowledged that it was sociosexual. When I see this series of pictures, this looks like two male belugas to me, engaging in the same behavior that we see over here on the left-hand side. So you see one animal presenting to this animal, you see that other animal rolling and presenting back, and then you see the next position going back and forth. And that's a pretty typical male-male interaction that we have seen in managed care. This image over here, a little bit harder to decide, because with those males, you don't see this pairing very often. But when we see courtship behavior and directed sexual contact behavior between males and females, adult males and adult females, there's a lot of following, and then there's a lot of presenting, much like this. But then the female, if she's receptive, would attempt to, would roll and be available potentially. And it doesn't last very long. And that's the thing that's kind of interesting about this series of pictures and what we have seen in managed care among a couple of different facilities. Okay, Keep an eye on time here because we want to make sure we get through a couple of other things. So this is to me is probably the most startling piece here. Whether I'm working with 8 animals, which includes 3 immature, which was one calf that was still bonded with mom, and the other 2 calves were weaned, and 5 adults. One of those is mom, and the other 4 are adult females and 1 adult male. Through 3 months of observations during the summertime, we had 57 total contact events, which gives us a rate of near 0 if you look at it per minute. And the majority of the contacts that we saw in this particular set of observations occurred between the mother-calf pair, with the majority coming from infant position, and then between the 2 calves, or the 3 calves that were present in this particular data set. Now let's hop over to 47 animals that we have collected over 7 years of observations at Marine Land of Canada. And look at that, the rate is also near 0. In fact, it's even smaller. And even though they have a lot more opportunities to contact one another based on their social groupings and that sort of thing, as we can see, it's not a very high rate of contact at all. But what the interesting piece is that when you start looking at who has the highest rates of contact, the calves, the solid black line here and the solid black line there, have the highest rates of contact. And who has the lowest rate of contact? The females and the adults have the lowest rate of contact. So that light gray area, so these are the females that are initiating and the females receiving. So if it's a female-female experience as an adult and a male to female experience as an adult, it's pretty near 0. It hardly ever happens. Over here, we have a little bit different story. So if the initiator sex is a female receiving with a male receiving, it's a little bit higher. And if it's a male to male, it's a little bit higher. So we were a little bit surprised that the male-male adult interactions contact wasn't a little bit higher in this, but it kind of makes sense to us because most of the contact that they're engaging in as males is pelvic thrusting. They aren't doing pectoral fin contact. They aren't doing body rubs. They aren't doing the head-to-head stuff. They're doing mainly a pelvic thrust, and they're pretty accurate with their positioning. Whereas the juveniles, not so accurate with their positioning when they're doing pelvic thrusts. So kind of as a quick little overview for this, belugas really don't seem to contact each other very often as adults, particularly adult females don't really spend a lot of time contacting other adult females. We've had 1 event in most of what we've seen, and there are a handful more in the marine land data with a lot more females, and they just really don't seem to contact. And if they do, it seems to be more so because they happen to be in a large social grouping, and it didn't seem to be an intentional, I choose to rub you, I choose to touch you, I choose to rub my pectoral fin across you. So there's a kind of a question with that. Calves definitely contact one another. Males and females contact one another. There doesn't seem to be a big sex difference within male and female contact with the juvenile group. But at some point, it drops out of the females and it stays in for the males. So it's a really interesting question because this is completely different from a bottlenose dolphin, which, you know, they're kind of far apart in the whole phylogenetic scale, but they're still related, and it makes it really curious as if they do have this fission fusion society, what's mediating bonds and what's going on. So this is kind of one of the questions that we still have to address. But they do like to contact things a lot. Whether it is the bottom of the ocean or an object that's been provided to them by a human or an object that is part of their environment, they definitely engage in a lot of object contact. And here is kind of an example. I'm going to skip through this real quick and talk a little bit about what belugas do. So we know belugas are pretty cool. They're weird. They molt, which means they lose their skin. So let me see if I have, there's a picture of it. So here's this is a yearling, and I believe this was its second molt, and they actually lose large patches of their skin as they slough skin material. And calves go through it a number of times in their first couple of years of life, and adults will do seasonal sloughing. So you see a lot of it in various populations, and even in managed care where the water temperature is pretty much the same year round, they also still show a seasonal sloughing. Not quite as much as you might see in their natural habitat, but they do it. So these animals really like to rub a lot on lots of different things. And one of the things that they like to rub on in human care are the walls and the floors and the glass and all that sort of stuff. So look at this. I mean, we're talking 57 events from the same set of animals that we watched for 3 months. We watched them again for another 3 months in the fall and another 3 months in the spring. And we ended up with 1,600 discrete contact events, with the majority of those contact events being the pull sides. And then a handful being with EEDs, which are the toys that are provided to them by the humans. So this was done back in 2010 and 2011. And so we can see that wall rubs were particularly important, particularly common activities for these animals. And so we kind of wanted to look at that a little bit more and see what happened. And what we discovered, first of all, is that we can reduce the number of wall rubs simply by mixing your groups up with different social compositions. So you can keep them entertained with objects and interacting with objects, but if you want to get them away from the walls and interacting with their environment, you need to put them with young animals. And those young animals make them active. It's not that they're necessarily socializing more with those young animals. It's not that they're going to play more necessarily, but they do. They just get out of a comfortable swim pattern and they start moving around a lot more. So if you can see, we have adults here who are not very active based on the measure that we were using at this particular point. And then as we started adding different kinds of animals, particularly younger animals, into the mix, you see that their level of activity increases dramatically. So this included object play, something more than just solo swimming, pair swimming, social interactions, anything and everything that could be more than just a solo swim. The other thing that we discovered by looking at some of the data that we had available was that when they were in different pool configurations, so they weren't in just a single pool, the number of wall rubs dropped dramatically. So one of the things that we've found is that if, obviously they're going to create different social groupings, you have different opportunities, different experiences, but the more varied configurations that we can create in pools that they have access to, the less of that pattern swimming and the solo swims that you'll see. You'll see a lot more action, a lot more activity. So to kind of wrap it up for everybody, because I want to get to the really fun video at the end. Why don't belugas show as much contact as other cetaceans? It's a question that we're still trying to figure out. Do they not have the same kinds of bonds? Obviously, mother-calf bonds are extremely strong. Calf-calf bonds seem to be pretty strong as well. They do have preferences. They certainly show sex preferences in terms of who they interact with and what they do with them. But what happens is they become adults. And that's really kind of a key question that I think we need to spend a lot more time on. It appears that contact isn't as important once they maybe hit sexual maturity. That's my speculation for males and females, for females in particular. And then males may use it in a different form as they get older and become adults and form bonds with other male adults. How is it related to their ecology or their social structure? These are the things that we're still trying to figure out. I'm super excited by where the drone footage and the underwater footage is going to take us. So it makes me happy to see that while belugas can be in very close proximity to one another, they aren't necessarily touching one another, which is kind of a different story when we look at other species of dolphins and whales. Obviously, how does contact with objects mediate play? So we see a calf down there, both touching the slide out and an object simultaneously. So we really like to understand how those two things happen, because in their natural habitat, they are beaching themselves, they are in shallows, they are rolling around and rubbing, not just for sloughing purposes, but for fun, it appears. And they do it in very large congregations, particularly in the Cunningham Inlet. But really kind of some of the areas that I think we need to begin to look at for contact with these guys is to kind of start looking at that hormonal exchange and the importance of touch, and to see, is it as important as we deem it to be? What is the relationship with oxytocin, which is a hormone that's responsible for social bonding and is released when contact is taking place? So how does that does it happen in belugas? Does it benefit them? What happens when humans are touching belugas or dolphins or killer whales? Do we see the same kind of soothing response that we would see with other animals, other mammals in particular? But one of the other areas that I think is super interesting is water is a different medium than air. And so they may not need to touch one another. They may need to just simply be close enough in proximity and create enough of a space that allows the water pressure to move back and forth. And that's enough for them to be able to recognize that somebody's there or somebody's near them or whatever it may be. So I think we still have a lot of work to do in understanding the physics of all of these sorts of things and how to do it within the environment that we have. So I'd like to say thank you to everybody for your attention and the questions, and I look forward to answering a few more questions. And thanks to SeaWorld San Antonio, Marineland of Canada, Dr. Michael Noonan, who's my collaborator primarily on all the contact stuff, and then a number of students over the years, but in particular, Cindy Alvarez and Sarah Dietrich and Christina Wall were instrumental in creating some of these particular experiences and the data that we were sharing today. And this is one of my favorite all-time experiences here, which allows me to talk about Tayunik. So this is actually Bella and Atla. Bella was a year older than Atla was. And Atla was an animal that did not bond with her mother to start her life. And we are always wondering, what happens when you have hand-raised animals, and do they develop in the same ways that calves that are raised with their mothers do? And you see right there, they just about engaged in mouth-to-mouth tug-of-war there, and Atla is laying basically on top of Bella at this point, and they're both on this very shallow ledge. And this interaction was particularly important because it showed us that Atla, despite not having her mother, was developing a little bit delayed, but was developing what a typical beluga calf would do. And if we think about Tayunik, who is a very special case from Cook Inlet, he was stranded and rehabilitated by 24-hour care from the time that he was about 4 weeks until today. And his story is amazing. And I invite all of you guys to go take a look at SeaWorld's story of Tayunik and the Cook Inlet calf that has made it. And he does all of these things, which is great. And Katie, you're making me cry. And I know you know who you're talking about. Okay, so I'm done. Yay.
Thank you. That was awesome. That was awesome. I'm not sure if we have too many more questions from anybody. I will, before we get into those, I'm going to actually share my screen and do my wrap up of our program. And so thank you, first of all, Heather, for that interesting presentation. And I would have lots and lots of questions. I could monopolize the time here. I did want to remind everybody that our webinars are recorded and we post them on our website. You can go under the education tab to find all of the different webinars. We are, I believe you are number 42 in the list of webinars that we've done. We also post them on DCP's YouTube page, which is cleverly titled Dolphin Communication Project. So you can find all of our webinars there. And we also have a variety of other educational content on our website. The Dolphin Pod, which is our podcast, hosted by Justin Gregg and Laura Teasdale, with a flair, sort of an interesting conversational flair. And our podcasts are available wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, the DCP website, etc. We do have our regular webinars, the deep dives, of which this is one, and we have our dolphin lessons. And we generally have them twice a month right now. So our deep dives are typically on the 2nd and 4th Thursdays of the month, and our lessons are on the 1st and 3rd Tuesdays of the month. And they are available online for viewing and details. And I wanted to just thank everyone for joining us. We are, as Kel likes to say, we are a nonprofit, and we wouldn't be a good nonprofit if we didn't tell you how you can support our research and our programs, and through our Adopt a Dolphin programs, our memberships, donations, and objects, as well as or items, products for sale. But also when travel is open again, you can join us in the field, either to Bimini or to Roatan. And there's a variety of other options where you can support us. And you can learn more about our programs on our website and through our social media platforms. So with that, I open the floor to other questions. If anyone has any questions, I haven't seen any in the last couple of minutes come through the chat. But I wanted to thank you. And one of the things that interests me is just the sheer lack of contact in belugas compared to dolphins. And I wonder how they mediate their social relationships. And what we're seeing among dolphins from what we're studying is it's very similar, the oceanic dolphins, it's very similar to chimps and ravens in terms of how they manage their relationships with the values, so security and compatibility, and that contact is used for that, but also object play is used, and their pair swims and the positions that they hold in their pair swims. Do you think that for belugas, maybe those swimming positions and object play might be more valuable to them as opposed to contact? And could, this is just throwing it out there, could the fact that they live in the colder environment mean that maybe they're less sensitive to actual physical contact?
I think that's a great speculation. I think they also use a lot of vocalizations. They are considered the canaries of the sea. And so, you know, when you turn the hydrophone on underwater and you get to hear, I mean, they're chattering all the time. So maybe, I mean, that would certainly make sense. You know, there is some, you know, physiological evidence that suggests that their skin should be as sensitive as dolphins based on the receptors that are present in them. But I don't know, right? That's different. That's a good question.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that when I'm in a colder environment, I'm bundled up, so I wouldn't necessarily respond to a physical contact unless it was blatant in that respect. But yeah, but that's me, and that's another whole story.
What I do think is fascinating is that the calves are very tactile, and juveniles are, I think, very tactile, and then at some point it diverges and it seems to be very different. And so like pectoral fin contact for, you know, bottlenose dolphins is very much an important part of their society, along with the other forms of contact, which is hopefully we're going to be looking at soon. But yeah, it's a really curious question.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate everyone joining us, and we will have this webinar posted later tonight or tomorrow, and we'll have it available through the website and the YouTube channel. And you know, thank you. I hope you have a great day.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. I'm so glad that everybody was happy to. It was good to see some familiar faces and see some new faces. So thank you all.